I've talked about this before, and it's still early, in my opinion, for the walleye bite to really kick off and get going. Being here for 20 years, guiding for going on 18 now, I have never had a lot of success in January and February. Just haven't. The numbers kind of speak for themselves. Now, you get towards the latter part of February, and you get some fish that start to show up, and it starts to evolve. But one thing that I've found is this time of year, those fish are worried about one thing. And it's kind of like if you're a deer hunter, you know, a buck gets to do it, you know, like a month out of the year. Well, you know what that buck's going to be doing. He's going to be on his feet chasing the does. Well, the walleye, I think, are kind of similar in an instance, meaning that they're not really concerned about food, eating. They've done all that since October, November, December, parts of January. They're just maintaining water temps 45 degrees, so their metabolism isn't really fast. They're not processing a whole lot of food. They're not moving around a lot. So don't get discouraged is where I'm going with this. Looking at literally catch rates and numbers since I've been here, it's just a fact. I've read fishing reports for years since I've been here. February, oh, it's on fire. I'd like to know where. It's just not happening. And so I'm not saying that we can't, and I have, and I know some others you have too, but go out and put 1, 2, 3, 4 in the boat in the morning. You'll start to see these mornings or afternoons when you go out, as we progressively get length of day or amount of daylight's increasing, the temperatures are coming up, these fish are finishing up with the spawn, and they're going to start schooling up. And guess what? Now they've got done spawning, so we're real hungry. And these fish will start concentrating on food a lot more. So just don't get discouraged. Like I said, last week of February is when I first start to kind of see the light. We may catch 1, may catch 2, walleye specific. So as a guide, I typically don't even target or offer walleye trips unless the client just demands that's what they want to go do until this month. So from March, April, May, June, July, so on and so forth, I've said this in the past, I'm a really good walleye fisherman for about 7 months out of the year. That's just the months that I found I can do best. I can put the most fish in the boat. I feel the responsibility as a guide to be upfront and honest with my clients that this is not a peak time, or it is a peak time, so that we can schedule and fit those trips in that fit what the fish want to do. Because it's almost impossible to make a fish bite that doesn't want to eat. And LiveScope has showed us that. You know, used to think it was, well, the cows are laying down, or the dogwoods aren't bloomed, or, well, you come to find out, you can stick a jig, a minnow, a nightcrawler, a snake, anything besides a stick of dynamite in front of these fish, and you cannot get them to bite. They just don't want them. And it's the same thing throughout the year. You get active schools of fish, and then you get inactive schools of fish. And so right now, we're still dealing with a lot of inactive fish. And I wasn't going to just go on and on about current conditions, but I feel like that's probably what most of you guys are interested in right now. So the current conditions that we have this year was a different year than many others. And what I mean by that is the lack of rainfall that we had in the fall coming into the spring. We haven't had any big, I'll show you how country I am, but gully washers yet. You know, maybe 2 inches here, 1 inch here. In the last couple of weeks, we've actually had some inflow. But that current is what is going to determine a lot of times how far these fish on the northern end of the lake are going to push up the river arms. So with no current in January and February really to speak of, and the lake levels being lower than normal, we've just gotten back up to normal pool, and the new guy that's running the dam is actually doing a pretty good job on keeping the levels stationary or at normal pool. So you're not dropping out spawning water from the fish, and it actually helps with the current. But what I was getting at, on no current, there was nothing telling these fish to stage or move other than amount of daylight. They're going to move according to amount of daylight. Water temperature is important and critical for the success of the spawn and not so much triggering the spawn. I've seen this throughout the southeast, chasing bass, crappies, everything else, and it may be 42 degrees in Texas, but you still got bass that are sitting on a bed in 3 foot of water. Why? Because the lunar table and the amount of daylight tells them to move. So our walleyes, in my opinion, this year were real lethargic on wanting to push upriver simply because the current conditions didn't really exist for them. You know, they lay their eggs in a riffle. So you got to have current, you know, to make it happen. And so without that lack of current, they had really no reason to push or get organized or go up. So I think that's why we've seen a delay in some of the major fish movements. And then I think we had a lot of fish that we lost over the last 2 weeks when the rivers flashed. If you look at the gauge at Shirley and at Clinton, these rivers of the Little Red, they flash 3 to 10 foot overnight. So you're talking about a large volume of water compared to what we see across a lake-wide height distance or lake level distance. So when these rivers flash like that, they get all the current in the world, and if I'm a walleye and I know I got to run upstream, I'm going to take advantage of that extra 10 feet of water on top of my head. I'm going to go a lot of places that you can't get to necessarily by boat. And I think that might have been one of the struggles that AGFC had this year, was the timing that they had their nets in place. And so I do firmly believe we had a large population of fish go up early and get beyond the reaches of the fishermen. Again, just because you don't catch them doesn't mean they're not there. And I've just seen this year after year. So don't get discouraged. Springtime is here. As the days get longer, the water warms up, and we get the shad moving in to spawn. That's a key element on the walleye bite. Those walleyes will trickle back downstream, and then the ones on the main lake, they'll get through spawning over the next couple weeks, and then they're going to be food oriented. And all they've got to do is sit and basically wait where they're at, because the shad's going to come in and spawn after the walleyes. The shad will be in surface temperatures, 58 to 78 degrees is where they actually have a window of a successful spawn. Again, that's only one factor. That's one factor. You have to have the amount of daylight in order to achieve that spawn as well. So you're not looking at just water temperature, just amount of daylight. It's all the factors combined. So when the shad start to move in and they get ready to spawn, the walleyes get to be fat and sassy and healthy, and they've actually got, you know, a food truck coming to them, and it's called Mr. Threadfin. So, you know, at this time when the shad come in, we've seen water temps over the last week up to 61 degrees. That's surface temps. But 53 to 61 is basically reservoir wide right now. Now these last 2 nights, I would imagine, I'll find out in the morning. I didn't have a trip today, but I'll find out in the morning, and I'm assuming it knocked some of the water temps down to 51, 52. That's still pretty good for this time of year. The best I can figure is we are 3 weeks ahead right now compared to any year in the past. And that's not only the fish, but that's your trees, that's your weeds, that's your, you know, everything putting on. So we're in really good shape to set up for a good spawn across all the species, because now we've got current in the rivers, we got the right temperature, and everything is lining up to be a successful, great spawning year here on Greers. So I don't foresee them taking the water below normal pool, and our normal pool will actually increase a foot. So we'll go to 463.04 the 1st of April. So we actually get an increase in normal pool come April, which that'll help, because 462 is about the cutoff where you can access, you know, your Johnson holes and your frontier canyons and way up middle for it. But looking to be a successful spawn. And our threadfin shad buddies, they're going to be up there for a while. And so that's going to keep our walleye where they're at. 0 to about 15 to 18 foot is what I would concentrate over the next 60 days. You start to see those water temps get into the 70s, mid 70s towards mid-May, and it's time to start changing and thinking a little something different, because again, the forage, your threadfin shad, are going to be coming off the bank. Now, something else to think about forage-wise is you got sunfish, bluegill, crawfish, hellgrammites, you got mayflies. You got a lot of different forage species out there that are going to position these fish or keep them where they're at, as long as they're comfortable in that, you know, what we say about the dissolved oxygen and the temperature, 55 to 70 degrees, and it's going to be above 5.5 parts per million. That's where they're going to stay year round, as long as those water conditions contain that formula of 55 to 70 and 5 parts per million or higher on O2. That's where you're going to find the walleyes. So through the shad spawn or the threadfin spawn, you got the first round of the bluegills and sunfish coming up. You know, you're going to have walleyes chasing and hanging around those fish. So spawning areas for those types of fish are going to turn into your locations on where we as walleye fishermen should start our look. So where I find a lot of the shad spawns is anywhere with riprap. Y'all got any idea where there's a lot of riprap on the lake? It's the Big Dike. It's a mile of riprap. With the Corps of Engineers, we've done a huge habitat project over there, and you'll find boxes that were old jet ski crates that we got from Ghetto Works, and we've actually put out close to 50 of these jet ski crates. And we don't just use the simple crate in itself, we come back and we use the cedar slabs. A lot of you guys have actually helped put and assemble some of these structures, so very much appreciated from one fisherman to another. But at the Big Dike, we've got a row of those in the trough, just off the trough. We've got some other brush piles and wood structures that we placed over there. And that's going to give those walleyes somewhere to rest their eyes, because they don't have eyelids. So they can utilize that cover during the day, and then when they're up chasing shad or on their forage, they got plenty of room over there for free range. So think about riprap, boat ramps, another great area. It's all concrete. Those shad are broadcast spawners. So they're not making a bed. They're real similar to a white bass in the fact the way they spawn, they actually broadcast, and they allow their eggs to stick to surfaces slightly under the water. And the best thing about the concrete and the riprap is heat. The stuff warms up faster than anything else on the lake, and we're a lake full of rock. It's like, you know, you get a buddy that comes up, you're like, man, they're on the rocks. Go with the rocks here. I mean, there's rocks everywhere. Look at rocks, you know. But they hold heat, so it's a perfect setup for those shad. Now, another type of cover that they use to spawn on, and we're speaking about the threadfin, are the marinas, tires, the floats, and everything else. Now, it's a no-no to go fish the marinas because it's against the law, 50 foot. So you got 50 foot, but it's almost like a sanctuary for us in a sense. Because when those shad get in those marinas, and us as anglers can't really pester them too much, it lets those mature walleyes, crappies, bass, catfish, everything gets in there and gets on those shad. It's an ideal, perfect habitat. So it's really good spawning cover and spawning areas for our bait fish that seem to be thriving. So we got riprap, we've got concrete, and we've got marinas covered. So when I start my search from 58 to 78 degree surface temps, I'm thinking about shad number one, even before the walleye. So if I feel like if I can find that shad that's utilizing those areas, I feel like I've got a really good chance at running into the game fish that I'm after. So think about your threadfin shad. AGFC has done a great job in reestablishing our threadfin shad population. As little as 11 years ago, there wasn't a single threadfin left in the lake. And so when you don't have any forage, you can't grow. So we definitely went through a die-off, and we're not pointing any fingers here or anything, but we've got a turnover in biologists and lake managers, and 10 years ago, this year, is when they started the threadfin shad and the bait restoration project. I've seen it go from horrible to worse to some of the best fishing I've seen since I've been here on Greers Ferry. The lake is as healthy as I've ever seen it, but it's not time to stop now. We've got to stay on game and fish, and about keeping our threadfin coming in the lake. Yes, I do believe we got a well over a self-sustaining population, but a fat kid loves cake. And these walleyes and these other game fish, they love shad. So let's just keep pouring the shad to them. And I think we're looking at really good things to come. Now with that die-off, and what I'm going to there is, there was a 2-3 year period where we got kind of ignored. And once they surveyed the lake, and they found that we did not indeed have a single threadfin shad left in the lake, we started getting them. So hopefully the new guy stays on it. I'm sure he will. But it's a responsibility for us anglers to do another thing too. And that's pay attention to your game and fish limits and regulations. So there's been a couple of regulations that have changed over the last couple of years. One of which is being the limit per day, per person, on our friend the white bass. Okay? As an angler that loves Greers Ferry, all of us here, it's your duty to keep your fair share of white bass.
Yeah,
man, it's funny, but I'm serious. Look, I hate these darn things. Catch and release, catch and release, catch and release. I love these walleyes. Throw them on the box. It's a little catchy, I don't want to catch white bass. I want to catch a bunch of walleyes, but I'm not throwing any walleyes back. But I'm throwing every white bass I catch back. So you can get around wanton waste by simply using them as fertilizer. Feeding whoever wants a fish fry. I know Sally down at the church would love to have a fish fry. $5 a head, come and eat all the white bass you want. And personally speaking, I don't hold a grudge against the white bass as a guide. It's a really fun fish for my clients that aren't species specific to catch. Literally Saturday we caught a 4-gallon bucket full of fillets. And happy to have them, So do yourself a favor before you start pointing fingers at white bass and all that other stuff. Keep your limit. There's no limit, so keep all of them. But that's the reason we don't have a limit on the white bass here now, is because they have literally surveyed the lake. They've taken, all the scientific methods they've got, and they say, hey, we've got a problem with the white bass here. They're happier and have rebounded faster than any other species we have in the lake. So, as your fellow angler and white meat purist, please keep as many walleye as you can. Okay? But keep every white bass you can. All right? And find somebody to give them to. No lie. They're great for in the garden. So that's our responsibility as an angler. Okay? So do the lake, do ourselves a favor, keep every white bass that you catch. Largemouth bass. And man, I'm probably going to hear it on this one. But they reduced the limit from 15 to 12 inches on largemouth bass. You know why? So we got a bunch of 12 to 14 inch largemouth bass in here. Okay? They eat. They grow fast. The spawn on a largemouth bass is typically about 10,000 eggs, and you have 1% survival rate in the wild. So it takes one female largemouth to make 100 largemouth bass on a successful spawn. So with nature going all in and saying, okay, well, if you only give me 1% survival rate, I'm going to have 10,000, I'm going to have 20,000, I'm going to have 30,000 eggs. So she's going to take care of herself, but us as anglers have to do our part and say, you know, personally in my boat, if we catch any largemouth under 14 inches, 14 to 12 inches, it's going in the box. Going in the box. And I feel like it's my duty to help the lake out in that way, and that's management. That's what Arkansas Game and Fish Commission calls on us as anglers to do. And they give us that freedom to take these fish and, you know, eat them, give them away, do whatever you want with them. But pay attention to those regulation changes. One regulation that people have proposed here lately is a 10-inch minimum on crappie. Well, the problem with that is because of year classes, we've only got so many fish that are over 12 inches, and the last 5 years, we've got a heck of a good spawn. We've got bait fish to feed the fish again. So if we go to a 10-inch limit, we're going to be overrun with small crappie from here on out. So the walleye, 14-inch minimum limit. I think that's a great response to what we're seeing in the data that they've collected. We don't have a lot of fish in the 20 to 28-inch zone because we got to wait on year-class fish to catch up. And what I mean by that is over the last 2-3 years, I've started seeing classes, year classes of fish. And, you know, and I'm talking evaluating close to 800 to 1,000 walleye a year. And when you see these fish, you know, you don't want every one of them to be 17 to 18 inches. And for 6, 7, 8 years ago, you either had a 17, 8-inch walleye, 18-inch walleye, or no walleye. You had 1 year class. Now, 5 years later, and we're 10 years later in on the shad stockings, now I'm starting to see 5 and 6 year classes of fish. So I'm starting to see a handful of those 23, 24, 25, you know, inch fish. I'm also seeing the 18 to 20s. I'm seeing the 16 to 18s. For the first time ever last year, I started seeing a lot of 11 to 13s. Well, that's year class fish that we've got to wait on to grow up in this healthy environment that we call Greers, Ferry now. It is not the same lake it was 50 years ago. It's not the same lake it was 30 years ago. You have natural curvature to the scale on quality of fishing and the amount of fish that's in the lake. But we've done a lot of things in the past 10 years to circumvent a poor fishery. And what I mean by that is we've got Game and Fish, Corps of Engineers, you guys, you know, that are out here trying to make this lake the best that it can be, that we know it all can be. And I think we're on our way to seeing Greers Ferry rebound and be back to what let's call them the glory days, but back in the 80s. But we've got a lot of different factors that determine our capacity. So you can either have 10 1-pounders or 1 10-pounder. It's capacity, and that's management. So that's why every white bass we take out, every Kentucky we take out, every crappie we take out, and I don't mind taking all this stuff out, okay? We're fishermen. We like catching fish, you know? So the more we take out, we can start swapping for pounds of walleye. It's surplus it, as long as we've got the year classes to come in behind it. Now, everything that I've seen tells me that this year is probably going to be one of the best walleye years we've had in a long time. you don't have to have a successful spawn every year in order to have a healthy fishery. And Mother Nature's simply not going to let that happen at times. You get the wrong rain or no rain, you get water temps that are in the 40s when it's April the 15th. All of these conditions have to line up, but for a reason. Mother Nature knows what she's doing, so the less we can pry and interrupt her, I think we're going to be okay. And I'm really happy with the way it's going. So don't, again, like I started out, don't get discouraged. It's just now starting to really happen, and these fish are going to start setting up where all of us as anglers can catch them. Other than the shad spawn areas, in areas where we find shad spawning in a cove, or in those marinas, or on the riprap, on the concrete, I'm keying in on transition areas, on main lake points that have relatively shallow water next to relatively deep water, but with a flatter, rounder cone or nose to the point. I don't want some of the points here, there's several of them. They're big boulder chunk. They're real steep points. Look good on a map, but what I'm looking for the walleye specifically are my flatter, rounder, longer taper, really slightly tapered points that have a flat on top, because those walleyes on the main lake that don't run upriver to spawn, that's likely where they're going to be building their nest, with pea gravel, sand, red clay, and then some mixed boulder rock or old stumps. Those main lake points are going to hold fish from now until really 1st of June. Again, I'm going to watch the water temperatures, because we have a amount of daylight at that time and we're done with the spawn. I'm going to let those water temperatures dictate to me on where I should start my day when we get to June. And Memorial Day is typically 72 to 74 degree surface temps. That's over a 20-year average. Those shad are still up spawning, but they are transitioning quickly to coming back off the bank. So as soon as we get to that 77, 78 degree water temps, that's when I'm going to leave my main lake points and my bars. I'm then going to start looking at offshore areas. And what I mean by offshore is I mean contours that are not related to shoreline. And one thing that's going to pull these fish, again, is our forage. So one thing I found in the full moon of June and July, we have another forage species, it's our bluegill, that are doing their spawn. And we'll have a little mini bluegill sunfish run in May, but the primary bluegill spawn is going to be that full moon in June and the full moon in July. Well, growing up, fishing ponds, lakes, rivers, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, Texas, Georgia, Missouri, a lot of those places, if we wanted to catch bluegills, we'd go to 5 foot of water in the back of a dead slick pocket, no current coming in, and they'd be piled up in the middle. A lot of these bluegill that I find are actually using your offshore gravel bars, flats, humps, really away from the shoreline. And you really don't want timber or anything else around. So there's a pile of that stuff out Salt Creek. You got Shiloh. You got out in front of Rocky Branch, Drift Creek. You got all the way down by the dam in Old Highway 25. There's a lot of places that you start looking at your map in that 14 to 20 foot zone. That's where those big bluegills are going to spawn. And those walleyes will be right there with them. Every year. And I get a lot of guys that want walleye specific trips, and that's fine. But then we pull up and start catching 12 and 13 inch bluegill. They're not so bad anymore, And at this time of year, I'm literally just dragging a drop shot or throwing a whole night crawler on a jig head, because I set up on these fish and I cast to them. I don't live scope all of them, because 5 years into it, and after crappie and everything else, and you get live scope net from staring at that screen, it almost takes away from the fishing experience. Don't get me wrong, I love my live scope. I'm as good as anybody at it. I have a 22-inch screen on the front of my boat, okay? I love it. But there's also a time and place to kick back, relax, drag a night crawler around, get you a few walleyes in the boats, get you some bluegill mixed in. It's a good time. So I kind of design my trips according to what the client's after. Yes, we can hard nose and we can pitch at 50 walleye and get 6 on the bite. Yeah, we can do that. But me personally, I like going out there. I like setting up on them. I like catching those big bluegill in between. And you will have some other game fish mixed in there. You'll have some big blue cats. You'll have some channel cats. You'll have some flatheads, which is one of the most underrated fish that we've got here, I think. Beautiful flatheads. But they'll move in and mix in. So I never try to be a fish snob in my boat. I want to catch what's biting and make my clients happy, of course. But that's gonna get those fish out there again, like in that 18 to 20 foot zone. And we're talking about, I think the dissolved oxygen deal and the meters and going around, I think that's brilliant. Because knowing what temperature at what depth is key. I mean, I base my entire fishing philosophy year round off of temperature, time of day, moon phase, and O2. And so you've got to have all those together to form a pattern. And us having the information now at our fingertips saying, okay, it is 68 degrees at 27 feet deep. Guess where I'm going to be fishing? I'm going to start at 27 foot deep, because it's 68 degrees when surface temp is 85 or 90. So, really, really big fan of that. But taking all these factors in, and then I kind of skipped over the deal from now until we get into May and late April with the shad spawn coming on. This year, I'm assuming the shad will probably start spawning on this next full moon. We've got the water temperature and the amount of daylight, and I think it'll be a successful spawn this year. But pulling crankbait seems to be a really good way to target those fish. They'll be suspended, coming off the bottom, start to move out a little bit deeper. So don't overlook that in some of those transition areas over the main lake points and stuff. All right, now fast forward back to, let's say we get into July. And July, you've got wakeboarders, you've got big boats running around, it's hot. 20 to about 20 foot, 22 foot, 24 foot, that's probably where we're going to be at the end of June. And that simply goes back to temperature and amount of available oxygen and forage. And so as we get up to those surface temperatures approaching 84, 86 degrees, that's simply just going to push those walleyes lower in the column. A lot of your fish will be in that 31 to 36 foot zone. Still going to be offshore because that's where their main forage is going to be that time of year. The bluegill deal's kind of wrapping up. You won't have those fish up there on the shallow sunfish because, I mean, they'll be suffocating in 85 degree water. So they're going to be pushed offshore 31 to 36 feet. At that time, you have enough separation from your boat and the bottom to actually fish those fish pretty vertical. And why this is important is because you can actually make a really good presentation to them with simple 2D sonar or live scope, but you can physically position your boat over the fish rather than having to cast to them at a long angle. When you're casting to them and they're at 31 to 36, let's just call it 40 foot, your line angle is really important on your presentation. So the deeper they are, the safer I feel like I can get on top of those fish and actually present really well to them. At 36 feet, it's pretty dark down there. Don't really think that color matters. We all get hung up on color, but for your jigging spoons, your jigs, your drop shot hooks, you know, we all like fancy colors for fishermen. I mean, there's 300 SKUs for Zoom out there. You need about 5. But color doesn't really seem to matter, but confidence does. So if you like pink, throw pink. If you like blue, throw blue. But you can actually, you've got insulation from those fish, because watching these fish over the last 4 or 5 years, utilizing live sonar and forward-facing sonar, you've got about 20 feet that you can get close to a fish. Here on Greers Ferry, other lakes are different, but here on Greers Ferry, 20 feet seems to be the cutoff line. They know you're there. They may not run, they may not spook, some of them do care, some of them don't care, but they know you're there. So as a guy trying to increase my odds, I'm very aware of how much pressure I'm putting on these fish with my boat and the boat noise. So when they get out there in that 30 to 35, like I said, it's a lot easier to sit and fish them vertical. You know, jig and spoon, shad imitators. Like I said, I'm a night crawler guy. It's just hard to beat. So jigs, drop shots. And then, let's see, going into August, that same pattern is going to kind of hold true through August, but what will happen is you'll have a very hard thermocline starting to set up, and it will have been set up. And that's going to limit where your false bottom is in the lake. And just because it's at 40 feet on the south end doesn't mean it's going to be 40 feet in the narrows or 40 feet on the north end. Your individual arms will have their own individual thermocline. So that's always a vital piece of information when you get into that August type area or timeline is, you know how deep those fish can be, because they're not going to be below the thermocline. They're comfortable at that 50, 55 degree range. That's where they're going to be. The thermocline's going to be at 44, 45 degrees. So use that kind of as a false bottom when you hit the lake. Even if as the fish start to get off the bottom and transition into following those deeper schools of shad around the lake at that time, you may be at 80 feet of water, but if that thermocline is set up at 28 feet, okay, they're not going to be any deeper than 28 feet. There's no oxygen. They can't live. I'm not saying they swim down there, they die, but they're not going to spend any time, and especially feeding time, below the thermocline. And the thermocline will actually get shallower the hotter it gets. So you may have a thermocline in July that's 40 feet, August at 30 feet, September at 18 feet. And then the lake stratifies. So a lot of us would identify this as turnover, but it's not turnover here because we're not getting the bottom layer of the water to the top. We actually have the top 2 layers that will turn over. So the bottom layer stays consistent, but it's called stratification. You can look it up and read more about it. But that's going to determine your false bottom on the lake. So that should eliminate a lot of water for you going into the fall. Any questions? Yes, sir. Okay, they'll get you a microphone. Yep. Yeah, take care of my guy in the back first. He got anxious. Then we'll get to you. I'll answer everybody's questions. Or do my best.
I hear people talk about the main lake. Where does the river arm stop and the main lake start?
Okay, so what I consider the main lake is anything west of the Edgemont Bridge, east of Five Fingers, and through the Narrows and south. So if you're west of Five Fingers, I still consider that kind of like South Fork. Okay? Going to Choctaw, going to up towards Johnson Hole, I still consider that very much a river system. Now, honestly, you could be main lake, like around Sugarloaf, Fairfield Bay, mouth of Dave Creek. That's pretty main lakey. But I think most people's consensus, main lake is going to be, Devil's Fork, through the Narrows, and down to the south end. And with the exception of Drip Creek, Rocky Branch, Bud Creek, and Peter Creek. That's be your more main lake. So less current, less inflow that flexes or changes things. Inflow in watercolor is a big deal. Big deal.
If you was going to try to target walleye at night, what would you do? Would you troll for them, or? They're nocturnal as far
I
as
get some cold beer. I don't like fish. So, assuming that I was going to, I would think, and I've talked to a lot of older heads and guys that, you know, were no longer with us. And they used to night fish them quite a bit. And they would actually pull big inline spinners. I mean, big blades, like number 6s, number 7s, you know, big Colorado blades to put that thump out there. And so I would think, you know, your inline spinners, your spinner rigs, your bottom bouncers, things that you can get a lot of vibration off of, or even, you know, your darker colored crankbaits. But I am by no means do I claim to be a night fisherman. Now, I do have friends that do it, talk to them, but yes, I would go big spinners, big crankbaits, wide wobbles, and I would take my depth recommendations for the time of day, and I'd cut them in half, because I can see so much better. And especially if you got a big bright moon in August, I mean, it sounds like a lot of fun. You know, and then you do have guys that go and tie up to the bridges, drop lights, and occasionally they come through. You know, a lot of white bass, a lot of crappie. Do yourself a favor, keep them off. But yes, so wouldn't be the right guy to ask for that, but that's just my opinion.
Do shad spawn more than once a year?
Yes, the threadfin shad is the perfect bait fish. It's perfect in all ways, except it's very cold tolerable. So that's why we're basically the cutoff line. You know, say Bull Shoals north for the threadfin shad. You won't find threadfin shad north of that because they will die off at 42-degree surface temps. But the good thing is here, we talked about it, we have that 45-degree layer of water, so they can actually use depth to insulate themselves. And during the winter, we don't have a thermocline because you have a continuous 45-degree through the zone. So that's why you're even finding fish in December and January that may be in 60, 70, 80 feet of water because there's no thermocline. So, but the threadfin shad, yes, 58 to 78 degrees, they will spawn as long as the water conditions can consist of 58 to 78. And the time of day, along with the moon phase, you'll have multiple spawns on every full moon. 58 to 78 degrees, and that's both spring and fall. Typically, we're fortunate enough to get 3 spawns in the spring and 2 in the fall. All right. So yes, these things duplicate, replicate, get going, they love it. You know, if you're a fish, you probably won't be a threadfin. Spawn a lot.
How do you locate your shad? How do you locate your shad, man?
Okay, so locating the shad, as we get warmer, it gets easier. So when we get into these prime time, 58 to 78 degree shad spawns, and I know a full moon is coming up, I'm physically scanning the lake as I'm going from location to location. If I start to see the water ripple, I call them happy shad. You know, nothing's chasing them. They're just up there kind of leaning on their sides, they're doing their thing. Well, what they're doing is they're spawning. So I use my 2 eyes to physically see them. And then if I'm desperate, I get on my side scan and my down scan, and I start idling pockets or main lake points or draws or drains that come off with the type of substrate or the habitat that I was talking about, the plastic, the concrete, you know, the things that the shad like. And then it's a waiting game on the fish to show up. And just because you got shad doesn't mean you got fish. And vice versa. But your odds go up when you've got an active shad spawn. Now the shad spawn in itself will take place from about 20 to 30 minutes before sunrise to about 30 minutes after. And that's going to be in the evening as well. So you may go into a cove at 10 o'clock, not see a shad around, go back the next morning at 6 o'clock, and there's shad and fish everywhere. And it's because they've ran in there overnight. They're going to do their spawning at sun up and sundown, and then they'll ease right back off the bank. So they're not going to leave the entire area, so you should be able to actually see or graph the fish holding in, say, 5 to 15 foot of water. Right now, under some marinas on the south end, there's millions of shad in there. Millions of them. And so they're happy as can be. Sanctuaries for our shad. That's what we should name the marinas now. Shad sanctuaries. Yes, sir. Oh goodness, this guy's gonna give me trouble. He's a heckler.
I just wanted to ask how you determine where the thermocline is.
I'm very fortunate to have really good electronics. So I utilize my Garmin, and your sensitivity settings, basically a $50 fish finder will show you the thermocline like a $10,000 fish finder. But you've got to adjust your settings. One way I would do it is I would get away from a treed location or a location where you have timber or wood. I'd get out in the lake and I'd just start bumping my settings up or my gain up on my overall sensitivity. And when you start to see the haze develop at that 18 to 55 foot, you'll start to see that thermocline show because the cold water is denser than the warm water. And the technology will give us that. Anybody else?
And something that I may add too, beginning in May, Don's going to have a map out every May, we're going to start in May, that's going to show you where the thermocline is. Okay, so for club members, you'll be able to go to our website and call up those charts. And what we're going to have is we're going to have a red, yellow, and green marker on there that will show you where not to fish, for those that don't understand thermoclines too well, where the green area is where the thermocline is. Taking the oxygen and the temperature, mixing those two together, so it'll be a real easy thing for you to determine where the fish are supposed to be.
That's a huge benefit. I mean, I'm telling you, that is one piece of equipment that could change everybody's day before they even start. Well, guys, if there's no other questions, I have enjoyed it. I appreciate y'all coming. You can find me on social media at Fish Greers Ferry Guide Service or Cody S. Smith, and I'd be more than happy to get with you, answer any questions you have, or get
We
y'all.
have one more question. We got
Okay.
one more question.
Sure.
Who's got one more question for Cody? Come on. Someone out there's got a question.
There you go.
Somebody wants a white address.
Oh, I got a couple of those.
Yes,
sir. Sir, I'm sorry.
How do you determine the temperature?
Typically, well, with the new probe that the club has got, we're going to know exact. But typically for every 5 feet, it's about 3 degrees. That's what I've found.
3 degrees below surface?
Yes, yes. So every 5 feet, go down about 3 degrees. So if you got 80 degrees on top, you're looking for 55 degrees, you can use the formula there and pick it up. So about 3 degrees for every 5 feet.
About 15 minutes.
But that probe is going to put us right on there, and I'll be using that.
I want to let all of you know something. How many know he's given a lot of information? Here's some good news for you. I've been taking notes. I'm going to play the video back, and play it back, and play it back, and play it back till I get everything. Don't expect that tomorrow. But within a couple of weeks, we'll have the video, and we'll have all the notes of the things that he shared. And in the past he shared, we have all the notes from the past too.
Cool.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, just a question about the eclipse. Do you feel that will have any effect on the fishing?
The last minor eclipse we had, I caught smallmouth during it. Just because I wanted to. So yes, if everything stays the way it is, and you've got, so fishing is different every day because the sun rises in a different spot in the sky every day of the year, except twice a year, and one of them's going and one of them's coming. All right, so it's different every day. But that particular day, yes, you should experience, not that I'm recommending it because there's going to be a ton of people on the lake, but yes, you should experience a daylight bite, a evening or afternoon eclipse bite, again, a morning bite, and then an afternoon bite again. Make sense?
Sure.
Yeah, that's my thoughts.
Thank you very much.
To reach Cody Smith with Fish Greers Ferry Guide Service,
call 501-691-5701. That phone number again is 501-691-5701. To reach him on Facebook, it would be www.facebook.com/cody.s.smith.7. Again, to reach him on Facebook, you can go to www.facebook.com/cody.s.smith.7.